Smith.
Thanks very much for the presentation and for the report and for highlighting these very important issues around it. And I'm afraid I have to leave to go to a climate change thing. I have a bill up next week on that. So I apologise for that, but I would like to ask a couple of questions. One is, given that, what was the figure? 100 and something thousand, 109,000 returned, 109,000 people in the last 4 years have returned. That's very good news, I would have thought, for us, because there's a shortage of labour in the hospitality industry, there's a shortage of chefs, there's a shortage of nurses, there's a shortage of teachers, there's worker shortages in the construction industry. So one would think that the government would be Céad Míle Fáilte, open them with, welcome them with opening arms and not putting obstacles in their way through these kind of mechanisms. And one obstacle I have come across, and I'd like you to comment on it, is a lot of young people who left when the economy collapsed in 2009, 2010, and have returned are trying to both work and educate themselves. And when they go to college, they're not entitled to fees being paid. And this will be their first time in college. Is there something we can do to address that? Because it's a big issue among young people. And as I say, the government should be bending over backwards instead of making obstacles for people, because there's a labour shortage on the horizon, to both encourage them to come back and work, but also to further train and educate and to pay them to do so. These will be workers who, before they left at the recession, had contributed hugely, through taxation and social protection, etc., to Irish society, and then they're told you're not entitled to an education. Would you comment on that for me?
It's something I see all the time. I had a call yesterday from somebody extremely upset because they didn't know they had been away for the last 7 years. They wanted to do, this was actually a master's, I think, and would have to pay non-resident fees because of that. Extremely upset. Whole plan is just gone now. And can't understand why, as somebody who's come back, who contributed for so long and had great experience overseas working and studying, why they wouldn't be allowed to do something to improve Ireland more by going back to college. Now there is a rule that for undergraduates only, that if you've been at school, I think for 5 years in Ireland or the EU, that you can access EU fees, but
not Irish.
Sorry?
Not Irish fees if you've been...
No, EU fees. If you haven't been in the country for 3 of the last 5 years, but you have been in school for 5 years in the EU or Ireland. So you can access EU fees, but not the free fees. So again, that's only undergraduates and doesn't apply to postgrad. So, I mean, yeah, that is a major problem, and it is a barrier for people, and it's actually extremely upsetting for people. And we do always advise them that it is possible to appeal, because I think the final decision rests with the dean of the college. But I've no idea how often those things are successful. We haven't heard about any that are, but it's something that it is a real barrier for people, and very frustrating and confusing for them when they're coming back to. Usually they're coming back because they've had families and they really want to settle back with their family and friends, and they want to build a life here, but experience overseas oftentimes isn't recognised on pay scales for things like psychology and things like that. Somebody coming back from Australia could have been at college in Ireland, had 10 years experience working as a psychologist in Australia, and would be put at the bottom of the pay scale when they come back to Ireland. That's also an issue. So these are things that I'm hearing about all the time, and it's, as I said, extremely upsetting and very frustrating for people in those situations.
Can you just clarify one point on somebody returned, just from yours, Deputy Smith, somebody returning...
Be entitled to it?
That's my understanding of it, yeah, to Irish.
But when they come back immediately, they're not?
They're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless they had been short, in other words, it's 3 of the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So if they'd been away for a year or two, they would be okay, but if they're away for obviously 3 years or longer, they're now...
The cohort I have met are people who emigrated in 2010. That's now 8 years. They want to come home. They may be mechanics or something like that, and the trade is not great at the moment, and they want to better themselves. And they're being told, even though they grew up here, their parents grew up here, they paid into the system, they're being told they're not even entitled to undergraduate fees being paid. So having to wait 3 years before is a big disincentive to returning home.
Yep.
And it's no wonder the government are making the bags of inviting people to come back and settle here when they have these stupid clauses.
Yeah, and that's the sentiment that I hear from most people. So other contacts.
The government actually endorsed, recommendations that come out of a report that was issued or commissioned by the Minister for Diaspora Affairs, and there's an interdepartmental committee looking at all these issues for barriers for returning immigrants. The Indicon report produced or suggested 30 recommendations, and there are quite a broad spectrum across all departments, and it will require a lot of cross-departmental insight and kind of commitment, and there, specifically around HRC as well as one of them, around more kind of regulation around consistency in decision making. One of them is around recognition of training and experience abroad, and education will be in there as well. So there's quite a lot to work on, and what we would be advocating for is that these recommendations are, there is commitment and investment in them, because we have a diaspora policy that is looking to facilitate, I think it's around over 100,000 immigrants as part of a long-term policy. So,
thanks very much. I just want to say that I just think it's shocking that they've no problem dumping young people out of the country when the economy collapses, and when it's rising they treat them this badly. It's just a complete contradiction in terms, but thanks for your help.
Thank you, Deputy Smith. Senator Higgins.
Thank you.